When people bring up the best FNAF fan games ever made, it's typically the same couple answers I constantly hear over and over, which is fair. Games like Candies, Flumpties, The Joy of Creation, and many more are all projects with lots of history, and have built up solid, dedicated fan bases over the years. The most popular FNAF fan games are also part of the officially licensed Fazbear Fanverse, which is a fantastic initiative, by the way. However, I think that this constant talk of the same couple fan games creates a weird bubble that almost makes people neglect the work of newer fan game developers. Like, sure, these old fan game series are good, but a lot of the newer talent almost gets swept under the rug. Big YouTubers will often still cover these newer fan games, why wouldn't they? But even with such widespread coverage, newer FNAF fan games almost feel underrated in a kind of backwards way. Now, I'm not saying that the game I'm going to talk about in this video is necessarily the most niche, hidden FNAF fan game ever. Lots of big creators have spotlighted it, but I do feel as if a game of this quality deserves to be brought up way more. And for how good this game is, I would definitely call it underrated in the grand scheme of things. Shout out to Super Horror Bro for putting this game front and center in a video about the best FNAF fan games, but even after a video of this size, I rarely see it brought up anymore. What game am I talking about? I'm talking about a FNAF fan game that not only mixes multiple of Scott Cawthon's game ideas into one, but also does them significantly better. Today we're gonna talk about Tyke & Sons Lumber Company. Released around 2 years ago by Mixlaws, Tyke & Sons Lumber Company is a fan-made sequel to one of Scott's previous games, Chipper & Sons Lumber Company. Many of you watching probably already know about Chipper & Sons thanks to the many references Scott has made to it over the years in various FNAF games. From Chipper's appearance in FNAF World twice, to the very obvious reference in the form of El Chip, Chipper is linked to the FNAF series in a multitude of ways. Chipper & Sons is literally the reason we have FNAF in the first place, with reviewers at the time saying the characters looked like creepy animatronics, which then gave Scott the idea for FNAF. And hey, Chipper & Sons isn't perfect, but I can't help to think that reviewers bashing the game for its visual style are kind of assholes. Like, this was just some guy's indie game, and it was torn to shreds. Chipper & Sons consists of growing trees, collecting wood and other resources, building things, and all around grinding to progress further in the game. It's full of a ton of charm, so it's not surprising to me that someone would want to make a fan-made sequel years later. Mixlaws had made another FNAF fan game before this one, being Baby's Nightmare Circus. I haven't played it myself, but it looks pretty good, and is easily one of the things that put them on the map for FNAF content. Now, you're probably wondering why I'm calling Tyke & Sons a FNAF fan game, when it's clearly a Chipper & Sons sequel. Well, this is where the interesting part comes in. Not only is this a fully fledged Chipper & Sons game, it's also a fully fledged FNAF fan game. That's right, once your duties are done for the day in the Chipper & Sons part of the game, you move inside your house for a FNAF-style gameplay segment at night. And let me tell you, the gameplay in this game is super fun. Neither of the sections feel half-baked, or one clearly being better than the other. Both of these could have stood on their own as individual fan games. When I first heard about this game, I just saw it while scrolling on GameJolt and sort of ignored it. About a week or two later, a friend of mine told me about the game again, and this time they mentioned the FNAF segments. I really wish I just downloaded it the first time, because going into this game fully blind would have been a crazy ass experience. The GameJolt page is void of any direct mentions of the FNAF stuff, which reminds me a lot of Pizza Sim and the way that game was teased and released. But unlike Pizza Sim, I think this game does the whole 2 games in 1 thing way better. The Tycoon sections in Pizzeria Simulator are neat, but they do feel a bit underdeveloped. Tyke & Sons goes all out with this concept, and for a fan game, I applaud the dedication and effort that clearly went into it. This video is gonna be split up into me talking about the day sections, the night sections, and finally wrapping up with anything else extra. So without further delay, let's get right into it. The game opens up with a quick intro cutscene going over the events of both Chipper & Sons and what happened in between that game and this one. Chipper is said to have gone missing, and nobody has a clue where he is. Tyke, Chipper's son who you play as in Chipper & Sons, had a child, Mike, the protagonist of this game. I can't help but wonder if the name Mike was chosen because of Michael Afton, you know, the protagonist of most of the FNAF games. Anyway, after that intro, there's another text-based cutscene that sets up the premise for the game, being that Tyke has gotten old and wants to give Mike the job of running the lumber business. And after that, you're thrown into the action. You have a couple of tasks to do in the first day, not very many, but it does teach you the basics of planting trees, growing trees, building structures, crafting lumber, and more. Crafting in this game is very simple. and all the crafting recipes you'll need for that day of the game are given to you straight up, which helps a lot with the pacing. One of the most obvious things about this game right away is just how well it captures the style of Scott Cawthon's models. It is crazy accurate, and at times you genuinely forget you're playing a free fan game and think you're playing an official sequel. It's that good. The music is also fairly decent, with a blend of both stock and original compositions. The main overworld theme is one of my personal favorites, and it's playing right now in the background. You're given a walkie-talkie in order to find out what your next task is, which is convenient if you just mash through dialogue or forget what you have to do. The controls are pretty straightforward, being mouse controls for UI and crafting elements, and typical keyboard controls for everything else. You have a watering can to grow trees faster, but you have to spam W to use it efficiently. I do kind of wish you could just hold down W to use it, since it can get annoying at times spamming the W key, but I get why the limit was put in place, which I'll bring up a bit later. On the ground in most of the areas in the game, there will be these little weed monsters that you can kill with the watering can. Once killed, they drop a present that has a random item taken from a pool of potential items. It's good to kill these things off in order to build up a solid collection of resources early on, for a couple of things that will be important after this day. However, there comes a point in the game where pretty much everything becomes automated, thanks to the structures that you put down, so killing these monsters becomes less important over time. For the first day, you're stuck within the confines of the lumber company, which is a good roadblock because the map opens up quite a lot after this day. This helps not overwhelm the player with too much land at once. For your final task of day 1, Tyke tells you to build a Chippo-Mat 1.0. This is part of the automation process that I briefly touched upon earlier, as the Chippo-Mat will collect wood for you while you do other important tasks. I'll make sure to come back to this when we talk about the night segments, but having your final task of the day be building this robot right here is a genius idea that works directly into the night section later on. Day 1 was essentially just a tutorial, but day 2 and onwards is when the game gets real. The structure of the day sections doesn't get very different after this one, so we'll go over day 2, then talk about the night segments. When I first played Tyke & Sons, I assumed that it was mostly going to be a FNAF fan game with short Chipper & Sons segments in between nights. That could not be farther from the truth. The length of the first day would even lead you to believe that, but from day 2 onwards, the days become much longer. The first task of day 2 involves leaving the small area you were stuck in on day 1, and making your way to the city to pick up a coffee for Tyke from your mother. This sets you on a straight path through some of the new areas that you can explore, and it shows you that you have much more room to plant trees and build structures. The blueprint catalog also opens up from here, giving you more things to build and more possibilities to automate things. You're also told here that clicking on certain things in the environment will grant you coins, creating an incentive to explore around and find new things to interact with. As soon as you leave town for the first time, you're greeted with a robot who is actually the first boss of the game. That's right, this game has bosses. You dodge the robot's attacks and use your watering can to do damage when your chance is given. This is also why I think spamming W to use the watering can more efficiently is a good thing. If you just had to hold down W to kill these bosses, it would become much easier. The boss fights in Tyke & Sons are not very complex, but the fact that effort was put in to include boss fights in this game where you wouldn't even expect them is really commendable. After the boss fight, you're able to walk straight over to the city and pick up a coffee. You have to win at this minigame where you bring drinks to one side and food to the other. It's pretty simple, but that can be said for most of the minigames in Tyke & Sons. For how simple they are though, a lot of them are really fun, and they help break up the grindy gameplay. Once the coffee is in hand, you make your way back down to the lumber company in order to give it to Tyke. After the coffee fiasco, Tyke lets you know that the business has some customers. The customer is looking for you to build a rock farm, one of the new structures in your blueprints. If you killed a bunch of weed monsters already, you may already have all the items needed for this build. But if you were slacking on that, or just didn't get good RNG, you have to farm a bit until the item spawns in a present. There is another way to make presents spawn, being building a frog shed, which auto-generates presents for you, but honestly there are so many weed monsters roaming around in this game, and the monsters auto-respawn when you leave and enter an area, so it's probably easier just to kill a bunch of them. It really is up to RNG how your experience goes with this game and the grinding. On my first playthrough, I spent like 10 minutes trying to get a good rock for the farm, but on my second playthrough, I already got a good rock on day 1 and had no grinding for it on day 2. Thankfully, a lot of the items you have to grind for to build these structures will then be automated by the structures you build, which kills off a lot of the grind later in the game. The remainder of the day consists of talking to Seabill, someone from the first Chipper & Sons game, who then sends you over to help some crabs by building structures for them. Once built, the crabs tell you a story about a robot they once had that has gone missing. The remainder of the days play out in a similar way. There will be a series of tasks to do, more structures to be crafted, new mini-games to go through, and more stories of robots are brought up by NPCs that you interact with throughout the game. More bosses to defeat also appear, and they get more challenging as the game goes on. Some standout bosses are this metal bird that fights you at an oil rig, with some insanely good visuals by the way, and this cool underwater boss which is pretty different from the other ones. The daytime gameplay loop, while extremely grindy, is also extremely satisfying, and makes you want to continue to collect more resources and build more structures. But at this point, you're probably wondering, what in the world are the night segments like? The night sections start right after the day tasks are over with. A nice transition image pops up, and then you're thrown right into it. Right away, this setup is a bit different compared to your typical FNAF game. The gameplay here takes place in your house, and you have a map on the bottom of your screen of your house. The square on the map shows you what location of the house you're at. You have 2 floors, an upstairs and a downstairs. Think of this main downstairs area as your office. You'll be here when you're not doing anything, or you're waiting for something else to happen. You can also turn off the light here in order to deal with a certain animatronic I will talk about later. The downstairs has 2 windows, one on the left and one on the right. You can flash your flashlight at it to see if something is waiting outside, and you can close the curtain to make whatever showed up go away. Once the front door is available to use starting from night 2 onwards, you can also run to it similar to the windows. Once at the door, you have no curtains but can still use your flashlight. You can flash your light out each side of the door window, and if something is waiting for you outside, flashing the light back and forth from each window will scare whatever shows up. Finally, we have the upstairs. This is another safe zone, for now, and this is where you're able to recharge your flashlight with batteries. You also come up here to sleep in order to finish your night. Unlike most other FNAF games, there is no time-based system in this game. Instead, you have a sleep assurance meter. It's at the top of your screen, and it will increase based on how many times you've scared away animatronics. The requirements to fill 1 square on the meter change as the game increases in difficulty, but it never feels dragged out and works just as well as a time-based system. Once that meter is full, you can run upstairs, go to sleep, and end the night. I absolutely love this gameplay loop. It's pretty similar to FNAF 4, being very audio-focused in areas such as when there are animatronics knocking at your window. But it also has a ton of visual elements that make it a good blend of audio and visual-focused gameplay. Things such as seeing multiple animatronics pile up at your window, or seeing a massive nightmare monster waiting for you in your bed, the one place you thought was safe, are standout visual elements to me. Before I go over what each animatronic does, I'd like to talk about how this all ties into the story. Remember when I said you end day 1 with crafting your very first Chippo-mat? Well, that very Chippo-mat is the thing that comes to attack you on night 1. You are crafting your own nightmares, which is just so cool to me. And this makes you look out for what other animatronics from the day sections are going to carry over to the night sections. Night 2 introduces a second Chippo-mat, so now you have to pay extra attention to both windows. But do you remember that crab story from earlier? The lost robot they talk about in that story comes to attack you from this night onwards. They are also the first animatronic to appear at the front door. So not only are you crafting your own horror, now you have to deal with the mistakes of others that you talk to during the day sections. This day-night connection works so well, and the transition between the buildup of the day and seeing what's added during the night is insanely good. Now I'll go over what each of the animatronics do. Chippo-mat 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0 all do the same thing. They will appear at one of the 2 windows and knock when they get closer. You have to find out which window they're hiding at and close the curtain until they leave. Like I said earlier, they can also stack up at a window, which keeps things interesting. Spring Crab, very funny name, will show up at the front door. All you have to do is flash your light back and forth until they leave. cbuild.exe will say a voice line when he's about to appear. You have a small window of time to clear up the windows and door before you have to shut off the main light and wait for him to pass by. While the light is off, Phantom Chippo-mat has a chance to jump scare you. which won't kill you, but it will result in draining your flashlight battery. Finally, we have Nightmare Chipper. Similar to Spring Crab, he will show up at the door and make you flash your light back and forth to scare him off. However, once the night is almost complete, Nightmare Chipper will sneak inside your house and wait for you on your bed. If you see him on the bed, even if you're fully maxed out on sleep assurance, run back downstairs as fast as possible and try again. Don't get too careless though. All the other animatronics still need to be dealt with, even when the bar is full. Once you get good luck and Nightmare Chipper is not upstairs when you go there, you can sleep and end the night. Easily one of my favorite FNAF gameplay styles ever, and it is insanely satisfying to manage everything at once and pull off a good run. Every single time you go upstairs to recharge your flashlight battery, you are risking your entire run. You need to make sure you are positive that everything around you has been dealt with before you go upstairs. That kind of pressure really adds to the gameplay in my opinion. There's a lot more when it comes to the night sections of the game, including an insanely good custom night mode, but I would consider all of that spoilers. I highly recommend you give this game a download and try it for yourself. I don't think the ending surprises would hit the same if I spoiled them for you. As I wrap up this video, I'd like to talk about a few things. First off, while doing my second playthrough for this video, I got a weird glitch that rearranged all the overworld structures that I'd put down. It gave me some really funny results, such as trees in places they are impossible to place down. Second, if this video has made you even a little bit interested in this game, play it. We need to support newer fan games, and this is, in my opinion, one of the best. It's not just a small game either. My first save file is almost 10 hours of gameplay, and there are still things I have yet to do in the post-game. My second save file for this video, which was just doing the main story, took a little over 5 hours to complete. It is a super fun and high quality experience all the way through. And if we ever somehow get the Fazbear Fanverse Round 2, this game 100% deserves to be ported to mobile and consoles. Is it perfect? Not at all. But for what it's worth, it is my favorite FNAF fan game of all time, and shows how much passion and dedication this community has. I've been Yeah, and that was Tyke & Sons Lumber Company. Thanks for 100K, everybody.
Is that a reference to Chippers and Sons Co.?